Ukraine has liberated more than 3,000 square kilometers in less than 5 days, which is an extraordinarily successful counteroffensive operation. The much-awaited Ukrainian counteroffensive in the southern Kherson region of Ukraine commenced in late August after approximately 2 months of hints and waiting and a lot of speculation, during which time the Russian armed forces transferred the vast bulk of their movable and elite formations that were already in Ukraine and still capable of significant combat power down to Kherson in order to forestall that Ukrainian counteroffensive. Once Ukrainian forces in this surprise counteroffensive in the north from Kharkiv Oblast took the critical railroad town of Kupiansk, they effectively severed the Russian lines of resupply, reinforcement, or indeed retreat from the critical linchpin town of Izium, from which the Russians had been launching much of their offensive in the Donbass to try and take the remaining Ukrainian-held cities in Donetsk Oblast. So the result is that Ukraine has liberated more than 3,000 square kilometers in less than 5 days, which is an extraordinarily successful counteroffensive operation. It's one of the most successful counteroffensives we've seen in modern history in terms of territory gained over a given speed of advance. But it's really left the Russians with very few options because essentially by telegraphing this southern main counteroffensive that everybody was thus expecting, the Russians have been kind of duped by the Ukrainians into deploying their best units that they have left and most of their reserves in a position where they're now stuck. So Ukrainian troops are probably fairly exhausted at the front line, and it's important to not overextend an advance like this, however well it seems to be going, because if units start to get isolated from their support and their backup, their logistics, it can quickly get to a point where you might lose more territory in even a relatively weak counterattack, or lose too many people in ambushes and such, to the point that it wouldn't be worth the additional little bits of territory that you might gain. Ukraine has already gained an enormous amount of territory back over the last week, and it's continuing to make progress in Kherson. So the limitation is probably going to be the need for the Ukrainian spearheads to be rested, to be rotated, to ensure that they don't get too depleted, and to allow Ukraine to absorb the huge amount of prisoners and the huge amount of equipment and munitions they've just captured, and to consolidate and try and start rebuilding the territories that they've liberated. So, essentially, at this point, Ukraine has kind of proven that Russia can be beaten in a very, very decisive manner if it gets the supplies and the time and the space that it needs in order to fight how it wishes. It's sort of proven the point it needs to prove before the winter. It's now very difficult for anyone in the West to credibly make the argument against sending large-scale aid on a continued basis through the winter and into next year, on the basis that, as some had argued, that Ukraine couldn't possibly beat Russia in the battlefield.